The banks had become so reliant on the government through this scheme that an architect activities by the government had a substantial effect on the worth of the assets held by the private bank. It was common for the Kuomintang officials who were in charge of the insurance of the government bonds to also sit on the boards of private Chinese banks. This would give the government official sites inside the information, and many of them had become the extremely wealthy and by trading in government bonds and securities. The Great Depression, United States Silver Purchase Acts of 1934, and deflation during the global economic downturn that occurred during the Great Depression starting in 1929. China had not only averted its negative effects, it thrived and experienced a boom in exports. During this time, China enjoyed inflation while most of the world was suffering from the severe deflation. In September of the year 1931, the United Kingdom officially went off the gold standard, and more countries around the world started to depreciate their currencies. This had a side effect that the value of silver Chinese yuan was negatively by this trend in the year of 1933-1934 and fatal below to the Chinese currency. American President Franklin Roosevelt and the demonetized silver as a part of his New Deal. The United States government then went on a silver buying spree at a price which was above the world price in an attempt to push up the price in the United States. The final blow to the autonomy of the private banking in China was dealt largely by external factors. Development in the United States, led by the Chinese nationalist government, to enact reforms that ended autonomous Chinese private banking altogether. In 1933, the government of the United States had begun purchasing substantial amount of silver, and the following year, in June 1934, passing the Silver Purchase Act, which stipulated that the United States Treasury should purchase silver from all over the world until the global price was higher than the $1.29 per ounce, or until the total monetary values of the American silver stock would reach 1% of the monetary value of its gold stock. The original intent of the United States Silver Purchase Act was to be a commodity support program for American silver producers, but it would have to prove many unintended consequences for the Chinese banking sector. This legislation by the United States federal government would cause the global price of silver to rise far by 75% in 1933 along, and 2 years later this price would triple as almost all banknotes that circulates in China were on the silver standard. China, many private currencies were experiencing a lot of deflation. The Republic of China was soon experiencing a rise in the import of the declining in the export. This also meant that silver started flowing out of the country. The export price of the silver would severely rose in the financial center of the China, Shanghai. This caused large amount of silver to flow from the Chinese countryside to the main port of the cities on the Chinese coast. This was followed by the massive export of the Chinese silver to United States. The deflation of the silver prices in China is most severely affected by China's agriculture and industrial sector. As a result, private Chinese banking would sell their silver reserves outside of China while slowing down the production and issuing assurance and new banknotes as they were withdrawing from more of their old banknotes from the circulation. These caused the supply of circulating banknotes to decline, and those still left in circulation saw their purchasing power raised. This was disastrous for many private businessmen across the China, as they would suffer from the accounting losses. As a result, the price would continue to decline, and the price of the sale was often lower than what they the product had cost the businesses. Many businesses were forced to fire a large chunk of their workforce to stay afloat and cut production costs. The debt was many businesses had previously made remained in the price of the pre-deflated currencies, meaning that the value of their debt were rising as it's had become harder to make more money for them, as nobody foresaw what the United States government would do. Many businessmen Many businesses had made a large number of the now unpayable debts. In November of the year 1935, the Central Bank of China officially took the country off the silver standard. This happened following the foreign exchange control imposed on the silver export in October of the previous year. This move, also made by the banknotes of the Central Bank of China legal tender, and made the Chinese currency a fiat currency, which gave the Chinese nationalist government in full control of the quantity of the money circulating in China, as there were now of the restraint on the power of Chinese government to turn the handle of the printing press to produce more banknotes. The Chinese central bank policy led to the monetary disaster. This disastrous outcomes was only made worse with the coming of China's war with Japan. The rampant deflation also severely affected the Chinese nationalist government, as their deficit financing schemes had become an even bigger burden for them. The Chinese nationalist government quickly began to enact policies to halt the severe deflation by creating control on the exports of the silver out of China. But these new control were proven to be largely ineffective, as the Chinese government had no say over the operation of the foreign banks in China, which exported silver out of China. Illegally smuggling of silver out of the China had become a profession in of itself. Desperate to keep its finance in the checking, the Chinese nationalist government was forced to seek new revenue stream. The Chinese nationalist government gave special privilege to the Central Bank of the Republic of China, such as the exempting it from the current regulation on the export of the silver. This allowed for the Central Bank of the Republic of China to thrive, while almost all private banks in the China were facing severe losses because the Central Bank of China enjoyed government patronage. It soon grew to become the most profitable financing institution in all of China. In the year 1934, the Central Bank of China owned only 11% of the assets of all Chinese-owned banks, but it earned as much as 37% of the all Chinese banking profits. The majority of the income the central bank made were used for the Chinese government, in spite of the export control placed by the Chinese nationalist governments on the silver and the revenue of the Central Bank of China. All throughout the year 1934, the financial situation of the Chinese nationalist government had become exponentially unfavorable. The Chinese nationalist government then quickly attempt to sell more government securities to finance its endeavors. To the coming time issues to the saving banks laws to help accomplish this goal. This piece of legislation mandated that the Chinese saving bank had to purchase government bonds until its holding of these bonds would presenting percentage of all its total deposit. But even the drastic saving by bank law had failed to have the substantial effects on the financial position of China's nationalist government.